Following video is brought to you by BSEN, Boston Sports Entertainment Network. Please subscribe, hit that like button, and as always, leave a comment, and thank you for enjoying the video.
Shot to right, slicing toward the pesky pole, down the line, it's going to be out of here! Line down the right field line toward the pesky pole, leaping up, and that ball is gone! That's a home run! They're a lot of our Nesson team as well. High fly down the right field line, headed toward the pesky pole, that one tucked in, and that ball is going to leap against the wall and into second base. Number retired, and now Rafael Devers trying to retire that baseball inside the pesky pole.
Welcome to another episode of the Pesky Podcast, brought to you by Boston Sports Entertainment Network. I'm your host, the Ritt. With me today is the OG, Mr. George Sutherland. And with us, we have an author of 8 amazing books. 9th one's coming on the way. What we're going to be mostly touching on will be the Two Sides of Glory book. And we got the author, Mr. Erik Sherman. Erik, how are you doing? What's going on?
I'm doing great. Thanks. How's everything going over there?
Not bad. It's a little cold where we are. But other than that, winter weekend, a quiet winter off season for the Red Sox. So other than that, it's not too bad. George, how you doing?
Doing well. Like I said, looking down in and see what's going on down at winter weekend, and it's a little cool up here. So, we're making it work.
So, Erik, you've been an author now. You have 8 books. The 9th one's coming out this summer. Tell us a little bit of how you got into, writing about baseball of all things.
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm going to be releasing my 9th book this summer, which is an autobiography of Dwight Evans. So we've been collaborating together for the last couple of years. And as you know about Dwight, not only was he one of the greatest baseball players of all time and should be in the Hall of Fame, but he was able to succeed like he did while having 2 sons with neurofibromatosis, which is often confused with elephant man's disease. So just a remarkable story. And I think Dwight goes really deep into his story. And I'm really looking forward to, seeing that story get out to more of a mass audience. You mentioned Two Sides of Glory, the 1986 Boston Red Sox, in their own words. That was a book that came out a couple of years ago. I visited the key and most intriguing players wherever they lived or worked from that 86 Red Sox team. And really, these 2 books, the common thread with the other 7 that I've been a part of, they all have pretty much the same angle. They're all baseball books that transcend the sport. So they deal with human interest, with challenges. Sometimes are overcome and sometimes they're not. But really, these books are about the human spirit, which could apply not just to baseball, but everyday life. So I know you want to talk about the 86 Red Sox book. I know, George, you lived it. So fire away.
Well, first, thanks for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it. So I know you've written a couple of books on the Mets, and so I know you have good relationships with them. Talk about how all this came to be, that you decided to write about the Red Sox, it's particularly this team, and any relationships you may have had with the players or those kinds of things. Because I think that's what most people are interested in is, how'd you come up with all this?
Yeah, how did a writer that wrote 4 Mets related books, an autobiography with Davy Johnson, an autobiography with Mookie Wilson, a book on their 86 team, as well as a book on the 69 Mets, their other world championship team. Well, a good friend of mine, Tim Neverett, who was a Red Sox broadcaster for 3 years, I've known Tim since we went to college in Boston at Emerson College. We played baseball together, and we're still great friends to this day. And after the '86 Mets book, he said to me, why don't you write about the '86 Red Sox? The other side of the story. And I knew Marty Barrett real well. In fact, we had worked on a book proposal back in 1993 together, but it wasn't picked up. The publishing industry deemed it too painful for Red Sox fans at that time, and too soon, even though it had been 7 years since the '86 loss. But what was so intriguing about the '86 Red Sox was, and I think the title of the book, Two Sides of Glory, it's perfect because they're down to their final strike in Game 5 of the American League Championship Series against the California Angels, one strike away before one of the most miraculous comebacks in postseason history. Then they win the next 2 at Fenway. They go to the World Series, and a week and a half later, the exact same thing happens against them. They're one strike away from winning their first World Series in 1918, exercising the curse of the Bambino once and for all, one strike away. And then the Mets have an epic comeback for the ages, which didn't win them the World Series, but it won them Game 6. And it led to a Game 7. Again, the Red Sox, just like they did in the 75 series in Game 7, they jump out to a 3-0 lead, but can't hold it, and they're bridesmaids again. And what I did with the book, like I did with the '86 Mets book, is I traveled all around the country, wherever these guys lived or worked, and I had some really deep, intimate conversations with these '86 Red Sox, and emotionally charged, every single one of them. Boggs and Bruce Hurst and Rich Gedman. I mean, tears were shed. I mean, it still hurts these guys all these years later that they could not have won that World Series, not just for themselves, but for Red Sox fans. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from the book. And Bruce Hurst said it so well. He said, sometimes the greatest challenges in life aren't what you achieve, but what you overcome. And I use that as the epigraph for the book. I just think it summed everything up so well. And, Bruce, it's kind of ironic. He didn't want to be interviewed for this book. He hadn't done an interview on the Red Sox, the '86 Red Sox, in 4 or 5 years, just too painful. And somehow I was able to convince him. I actually talk about how I was able to convince him in the book, but it was one of the great interviews I've ever had with Bruce out in Arizona for 4 hours. And one of the things he said to me was, he would rather have lost the World Series with that group of guys than won it with another group. So it goes to show how much those guys really loved, cared, and respected one another.
Of all the guys that you interviewed, did you come away with any one interview that you kind of get back to your desk and said, oh, wow, this was really special?
Well, I mean, Roger Clemens, we talked for 7 hours. That was really special. He really opened up, not just on his time in Boston, which he absolutely treasures, but he also touched on not being in the Hall of Fame. I brought that up. You have to. It's the elephant in the room. And, he talked about how much, that hurts his family, and he hopes he gets there one day. But if he did get there, in his speech, he would talk about all the catchers and all the teammates that helped him get there. But the Bill Buckner interview, and I knew Buck for a long, long time. I met him through Mookie Wilson. So I knew Buck for about 6 or 7 years before he passed away. And my interview with him was the last interview of his life. And it was really poignant about how he still hurts, or how he still hurt to the very end over the fallout from that error that he made in game 6. The Boggs interview in his home, very emotional. The Bruce Hurst interview, like I alluded to, very emotional. Marty Barrett, he's just so astute. His interview is great. Honestly, they were all great in their own way. Trying to pick a favorite would be like trying to pick amongst your kids. Who's your favorite kid?
Erik, it's kind of funny. On the Pesky Party Hour, another Red Sox podcast that we have here on BSEN, we got a guy, Mike Carissa, who was a pitcher for the Red Sox in the minor leagues at the time. And, he was talking to me because we were talking about you coming on the podcast and the book and everything. And he goes, I bet you I could sit there and tell some stories that he couldn't even have, because he's like, the spring training in 87, after 86 happened, his locker room was right in the middle of Bill Buckner and Roger Clemens.
Oh,
so
boy.
he's like, the stories I could sit there and tell. And I'm like, well, please do tell, but we will love to hear those, the conversations of, going back and forth between those two.
Well, I'll say this, whenever you write a book, one of your goals is to uncover something that's never been told before. And since we were just talking about Buckner, Marty Barrett shared with me how when the Mets tied it on that wild pitch, Ray Knight was just so excited at second base. He was like a little boy jumping up and down. He's taking like a 40-foot lead off second base. So Marty picks up on that, and he signals for Gedman, for a pickoff play. But Stanley was so focused on keeping the game tied that he didn't pick it up, or whatever the case was. And so, as often happens, when the pickoff play is on, or the second baseman thinks it's on, he shades towards second base. And in doing so, the first baseman shades towards second base to cover some of the second baseman's ground. So Buckner, on 2 hobbled Achilles heels, with Mookie Wilson, one of the fastest runners in baseball, this guy's way off first base. So, of course, Mookie hits the dribbler close to the line at first. So Buckner's got to somehow get over there, which he does, but he kind of skids a little bit. And then the ball, after bouncing a couple of times, just goes flat. It flatlines. So who's to say that if Buckner were in his normal position, that he doesn't field it cleanly? Maybe he would have been able to set himself better, but we'll never know. Of course, the other thing is, Stapleton, he went in there as a defensive placement for pretty much the second half of the year into the playoffs. But with a 2-run lead, McNamara asked Buckner, do you want to go out there? And of course, Buckner said, he wanted to be out there. He wanted to be one of the Warriors coming off the field after the Red Sox would have won their first World Series in 68 years, the first since 1918, to finally, at last, exercise the curse of the Bambino. But getting to spring training, one of the things that Buckner told me was, after the error that he made, and then after McNamara pulled Clemens out of Game 6 with a 1-run lead because Clemens had developed a blister, the whole winter kind of went by without a whole lot of talk about that. But in spring training, the writers need something to write about, and they started stirring things up. And it really caused a rift. I mean, it caused a rift between Clemens and McNamara. All the talk about Stanley and Gedman, who was crossed up on that wild pitch. It caused a little rift there. And then, with Buckner, if he fields it cleanly, the game is still tied. And so it was the writers, according to these Red Sox players, that really stirred the pot and made it difficult on them. And because, one final thing I'll say about this is people often forget the Red Sox had the biggest victory parade for winning the pennant after the World Series in Boston sports history. At Government Center, they had the parade through Boston, and I was there. And I can tell you, it was massive. And there was nothing but positivity in that crowd. It was like New Year's Eve. So the fallout really came the following spring. And, for guys like Schiraldi, he was never the same pitching wise. Buckner never got over the era, the fallout from it. And, the whole Clemens McNamara rift went on until the day that McNamara died. So there was a lot there, unfortunately. So I'm sure that your friends got some great stories from that spring training of '87.
Yeah, George and I talked because I'm 100% just like George, where Buckner shouldn't have been in there at all during that play or during that series. And I often ask George, in 04, would the Red Sox fans did the same thing to David Ortiz if he was sent out there to play first base and it happened to him? For as beloved as David Ortiz is, if that would have happened to him, would the Red Sox nation turned on him like they did Buckner so quick?
No, I don't think they would have. I think in Buckner's case, God, it's so different, I mean, Ortiz, you're talking about even by 04 was legendary. I mean, what he did for that team in 03 and then 04. It's such a great question.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And I've never thought about it, but
they were different kind of players too. I mean,
it would have been different.
They're different players. I mean, Poppy had a very open personality, kind of like, big teddy bear type. Bill was a professional. He a professional hitter. He's in '86. He had a tremendous season. He knocked in over 100 runs. I mean, they got him for that purpose, that he could hit and he could still play first base on two very hobbled legs, as you mentioned before. And as I said, I blame Mac for that. He asked him, but Mac's he had no trouble pulling Clemens because of a blister. You make the defensive replacement, and
yeah, that's right.
And George, he's the boss on the field.
Right. Absolutely. He's got to make the tough decisions. And the irony, I guess, is that McNamara thought so highly of Buckner, a veteran player that came up in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
He would finish his career with 2,715 hits, a batting title, a higher fielding percentage than Lou Gehrig. So he really left it up to him. And then, there's the talk, well, Stanley should have started that last inning. But, a couple of things that were interesting to me in talking to the players, almost to a man, by that point in the World Series, they all felt that Stanley was the better option than Schiraldi, which surprised me because Stanley had an off year. His ERA was over 4, and Schiraldi came up the middle part of the season. I mean, he was just what the doctor ordered. He had an ERA of 1.41 in the second half of the regular season. He was a fireballer. I mean, he was a strikeout machine. And but in the big moment, in the postseason, he struggled a bit. Whereas Stanley didn't give up an earned run in that World Series, and even the Mets players I talked to about it, like Keith Hernandez, he said they weren't worried about Schiraldi. Plus, they knew him. Schiraldi came up with the Mets. They were concerned with that sinker ball from Bob Stanley, and the fact he was a veteran and all that. But man, that really surprised me. And then the other thing, getting back to Clemens' blister, Clemens told me, he's like, I could have stayed in. I had my batting helmet on to hit in the 8th inning. He was ready to go. What he told me was the blister would only affect him when he would throw the curveball. And his curveball wasn't working great that night. He had given up, I want to say, 5 hits to that point. And it may have been 6, but I think it was 5. And 3 of them were off the curveball. So his fastball and his off-speed pitch, where you don't put pressure on that index finger, wouldn't be affected. So Clemens told me, I was just going to throw fastballs and off-speed pitches the rest of the game, and I would have been fine. So he did not want out. And believe it or not, after the book came out, I received a handwritten letter, 2 pages, from Joe Morgan, the Red Sox coach on that team. He's like 95 years old now, 94 years old. And he heard, I think it was Al Nipper, say that Clemens did not want out. That he was trying to stay in the game, but McNamara didn't want to take the chance. So with that blister. So who knows what could have happened. But, the whole Buckner thing, I mean, that was the final nail in just a series of missteps by the Red Sox.
Yeah, your point about Schiraldi is key, I think, to that, in that, the Mets knew him well. He came up from their system. The Red Sox had acquired him along with 3 other players. And quite frankly, as much as they wanted him because he was a fireball, they were more interested in Michelle Tarver at the time because he was a speedy outfielder. And, he made a couple of appearances in '86 and never surfaced again. Everybody, they were more excited about him than they were about Schiraldi. But you're right. He lost his confidence. He never got it back. And you could see that, he looked scared on the mound. He looked like somebody who had just been whipped. One of the things as I was, thinking about it back, because, I remember sitting there and watching the game and going from that super high of being ready to jump off the couch and probably wake up my kids at the time because it was after midnight.
Yeah.
And then, 10 minutes later being, oh God, what did I just watch?
Yeah.
And it felt in many ways like 75 because, 75 was, Fisk hitting the home run and, you felt great after that. And then Game 7 comes along and it was over. But, that whole dynamic was like, it was so strange because it was, as a fan, you're ready to join in the celebration and then to have it taken away in such a manner. I think that's the thing probably hurt much for fans and even more so. I can't even imagine what it felt for the players. I mean, they're anticipating. You see the picture of the bench that that they keep panning it back. They're waiting. That they're ready to explode, and then the air gets let out of the building.
Yeah.
If looking back at it, how would you rate this World Series in terms of like in the last 50 years? And I just mentioned 75. How would you rate this World Series?
The 86 series?
Yeah.
I would rate it. Well, it's interesting. The first 5 games weren't particularly compelling. Unlike 75, where I think every game except game 1 was a 1-run game, something like that. Since 75, so it's 50 years, believe it or not. I would say the 75 series was the greatest World Series of all time. Probably that Twins Braves series was up there in 91, I think it was. That was the final game. My God, it went extra innings and Jack Morris went the distance. I think it was a 1-0 game. Could you imagine if it was Mets Red Sox in a final game like that? The cities involved, it does matter. And the players, the characters, I think in 75, so to answer your question, the 75 series was the greatest of all time, not just the last half century. And I've talked to Pete Rose about this. I've talked to Dwight Evans, obviously, about it. I talked extensively, believe it or not, to Jim Rice about it. And the reason I say that about Rice is he's not the most forward guy with writers, but he was terrific with me. But not only was the 75 series epic in its dramatics, but the characters on both sides, it was just compelling. On the Red side, you had Pete Rose, you had Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, you had the charismatic manager Sparky Anderson, you had a terrific lefty Don Gullett. Then, my God, on the Red Sox side, with characters, you start with Bill Lee and Louis Tiant, and then you had the two rookies, Freddie Lynn and Jim Rice. You had Carl Yastrzemski, you had Carlton Fisk. It just goes on and on and on. And so I think from an entertainment standpoint, 75 dwarfs everything else. 86, it had the biggest television audience in the history of the World Series. The final game, you had 58 million people tuning in to that last game. I think you had 52 million for game 6. No, I'm sorry. A 58 share. I'm sorry. A 58 share and a 52 share, which
that's unheard of.
Compare that to today, George.
Oh yeah.
It's like 7% or 8%. Think about that. 58% to like 7% share. Incredible. So, but the 86 series, in the last 50 years, top 5. Top 5.
So, George, I'm kind of curious. What do you think is your personal favorite World Series, go-to World Series to watch?
I'm with Erik. The 75 series. It was the dramatics in that series. Every game was, except for one, was close. It was tremendous plays. And unexpected heroes. Bernie Cabo going deep.
Yeah. Right.
Evans making that catch. Of course, the Fisk moment, which is lives on forever because of the rat in the wall, in the monster that got the particular picture of him pushing the ball fair. There's so many great stories to that. And
Dwight Evans catch.
Dwight Evans catch. There's another one. The other thing was with that series. The Red Sox, the big red machine rolled into town. And quite frankly, the Red Sox weren't given a whole lot of chance. It was like the big red machine against the little red wagon. But one thing about that, the 75 team was, as you said, it had a group of young players. You had a young outfield, although Rice wasn't able to play. But the two rookies come up. You had Rice and Evans. You had a young Dwight Evans. Yep. They picked up Carbo in the offseason. Fisk behind the plate. Rico playing third base. There was some, and they had a decent pitching staff as well. But the Reds carried all. They were the team at that time. They were the hot team, and I remember going into it thinking it wasn't going to happen a whole very exciting. But hey, I was excited that the Sox were in the series again. But yeah, what a tremendous series.
Yeah.
Followed up after that for me is 2004, obviously, because they finally won it. But the 86 I appreciate more now as I look back at it because of just the highs, just the incredible highs and lows that went with it in a short period of time. And the fact that eventually Bill Buckner got vindicated, and as I said, the man was a professional. He dealt with it, and I don't think I'm not so sure that I could have dealt with it if I was a player. Some of the things he went through.
No,
but
and
he's a great guy.
he was the first one in the ballpark every day because he'd have to get his legs worked on, get them wrapped up, and then unwrap them, to go out in the field and batting practice, then wrap them up again. When they would go on the road, he would always get the room closest to the ice machine because he'd have to ice down every night. I mean, it was, but there is a huge difference with the players. So Dwight Evans, he remarked that baseball fans would come up to him in airports and so forth, and they'd say, that 86 World Series is the best World Series I've ever seen. And he would get that a lot. And for a while, his response was, what are you talking about? It was devastating for us. It wasn't a great World Series. But as time went on, like you, George, he began to look at it from a pure baseball fan's viewpoint. And that viewpoint is, my God, this was an incredible, at least finish to the World Series. Game 6 and then Game 7. And I mean, for high drama, it was incredible. Now, the 86 players don't necessarily look fondly at that 86 series, but the 75 series, the guys I've talked to from that series, very different scenario. They understand fully what that World Series meant to the sport, what it meant to the country, and the fact that it was the last pure World Series that we'll ever have. Pure in the sense that free agency started that winter and really changed the sport. And so no more would you just, have these guys come up from the farm, like the Red Sox had with Rice and with Lynn and with Fisk and so forth, and Bill Lee and so forth. Now it was through free agency where teams really got better. So the sport really changed. Baseball the popularity was way, way down. And Game 6 really changed that. I mean, Peter Gammons wrote a book about it, a great book, Beyond Game 6, I think it was called. And so that was a revolutionary series. And I think the Red Sox players, even though they lost, they understood the significance.
Yeah, Erik, I'm kind of curious. You interviewed Boggs, you interviewed Clemens, both for your book. I'm kind of curious of did you actually get the chance to ask them, or did you ask them from going from the Red Sox and when they became like Wade Boggs, when he became a Yankee, what was his thoughts and reactions his first time coming back to Fenway Park?
Well, the first time back, of course, that was in '93, and he went 4 for 4. And we talked about it in the book. We talked about two things, Yankees, Red Sox related. The first was his first game back. He goes 4 for 4. So now he's a Yankee. He's in Fenway. First time up, he gets up to the plate. It's like 70% boos because he's a Yankee, 30% cheers for all he did in Boston. Gets a base hit. Second time up, now it's like 60-40. Third time up, now it's like 70-30 cheers because of what he's doing. And of course, after he gets his fourth hit of the night and goes 4 for 4, he gets a standing ovation from the Fenway faithful. So in his greatness, he really brought those fans back in that one game. And the second thing I'll say is he wins a World Series with the Yankees in 96. He's up on the police horse getting, a ride around the outfield to the adoring fans. So, he's riding behind a, police officer. He's on the saddle with the police officer on that horse. And I asked him, what was he thinking at that time? And he said to me, I was thinking how amazing this would have been if it were in Boston back in 86. So I thought that was just an incredible statement, and that, his heart's always been in Boston.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, his body and his is in the Yankee Stadium, but his heart and his soul is still left in Boston. And, that just shows how much of a first-class act Wade Boggs is. And, I was telling George, Christmas Eve, checking Twitter out, and there it is. We get a follow back from Wade Boggs, and I'm like, no, we could put that in the cap because, just somebody with his first class, the way he is, to even recognize us was amazing.
Yeah, when I went to his house, we talked hitting for about a half an hour, and it's all in the book, Two Sides of Glory. We talked hitting, and he said, do you want me to give you the scientific version or the elementary school version, something like that? And he gave me both, and it was like sitting with Albert Einstein, talking science. I mean, it was just remarkable. I mean, this guy just lives, eats, and breathes hitting. And he also has that photogenic memory when it comes to hitting, much like Pete Rose and all the great ones, or a lot of the great ones. He can pretty much remember every single hit that he ever had in his career. Just remarkable.
In your opinion, if you had to, of all the interviews you did, which of them was a surprise in how open that the player was?
Well, it would have to be Bruce Hurst because he didn't want to do the interview. So, it still hurt after all these years. What happened in 86? He hadn't done an interview in 4 or 5 years. And now I'm coming to him for a book. And what happened was, well, first of all, I got through to him, and I talk about this in the book. On his phone popped up the name Pam Ken, who's the alumni director of the Red Sox and is beloved by the alumni. They love her. She's been with the Red Sox for over 20 years, and she really takes care and protects these guys. And so he gets on, and he's like, super friendly at first until he realized, he's talking with a writer. And so I said, look, this is what I'm doing. And for 25 minutes, he was just like, he was very polite, very kind. And he just said, look, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But I just kept talking to him about, well, I've talked to this guy and this guy and this guy, and you're really like the last one that I need from the prominent guys. And he finally acquiesced, and he said, well, I don't want to be that guy, that guy that turns you down. And I said to him, I said, look, if I fly out to Arizona to see you flying out from New York, 30 minutes, that's all I need. And he says, no. If you fly all the way out here, I'll give you as much time as you need. And he met me at my hotel. We talked in the restaurant. He was impeccably dressed and ready to go. And he really opened up. So the fact he didn't want to talk at first, and then he was so open with me, it would have to be him. Like, that was the biggest surprise of somebody opening up as much as they did. And he really did. I mean, he really opened up his heart.
Well, one thing I always talk to DC and George about is when we bring people on, players, staff, writers, podcasters, and I'm always like, man, I love, especially with the players, the relationships you build with them. And, what is it like, Erik, knowing that you're with your line of work and everything you did, that, you're not only telling stories to people, but you build all these relationships with players, managers, etc. So how does that feel for you?
It's extraordinary. And I think it's different for an author as opposed to a beat writer. I mean, I think a beat writer's got to keep more of a distance. But I tell people, with most of these guys, I become like a priest, a best friend. They just open up to me and they tell me a lot of times their deepest, darkest feelings. And, particularly people that I write, a book about, they really open up to you a great deal. So,
George?
Sure. When I was reading your bio, I noticed that you talk a little bit about being an annual lecturer at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Talk to me about that, because that absolutely intrigues me as to the nature of those things and how they're put on.
Well, I'll never forget the first one that I did, and I mean, I was so nervous. I was just like, my God, this is hallowed ground. I'm actually going to speak inside the Hall of Fame, and but I'm told from Bruce Markison, who is one of the research executives at the Hall of Fame, who runs the baseball author lecture series for the Hall every summer. And, he says I'm the all-time leader in appearances because I'm there basically every year, and sometimes twice in one year, like this year. I'm actually going to be here. Here's a plug for myself. I'm going to be at the Hall of Fame on Saturday, February 3rd, talking about my book that was released this year, Daybreak at Chavez Ravine, on Fernando Valenzuela. So it never gets old. It's always a thrill, and I look forward to it. And I don't even care how many books that I sell. I really don't. It's it's just such an honor to be asked to come back as often as I have. And it's as a writer, there's so much time by yourself, and there's so much time in your office, and you don't see people. And then, you come out to promote a book, and with one of those stops annually being the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's pretty special.
I know for myself, I got to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame for the first time about 15 months ago. And I've been a lifelong baseball fan, and I cannot tell you how moved I was as I stepped in the front door and then started to go through all the exhibits.
Yeah.
And it's a very special place.
Yeah.
And I remember when I left having this feeling of, my goodness, I feel so privileged to have been here, especially when you see the history, and if you appreciate the history of baseball and everything that it brought, to this country. I think that in itself is pretty special. So I was just more curious as to, how that all came about, and the fact that you've done a number of different times, I think, is terrific. I think those are very important things, because baseball plays an important role in what this country was all about. So,
well, they also have the best research center, anywhere for baseball. And so last winter, I was in Cooperstown, not only to give a lecture and a book signing. It was in February, early February, just like this year. And I was doing research for the Dwight Evans book, and it was minus 17 degrees outside. So the town, it's a ghost town.
Yep.
And so, I do my research until they close. And I was the only one in the Hall of Fame. So it was darkly lit. You could still see, but it's just me and all those plaques in that hall. That was really cool. That was really cool. I mean, when you experience something like that, you could almost feel, I'm not going to say ghosts, but you could almost feel those Hall of Famers around you.
There's a presence there when you walk
absolutely
in the Hall
is.
Yeah,
There absolutely is. And I hope to do that again in a couple of weeks, because I'm researching my next book project, and so I'm going to have to go back to that research library again, and I'm sure I'll be there until closing time, and I want to experience that again. I mean, that is, to be in that Hall of Fame, you're the only one in there, except the person that's going to let you out the front door. That is really, really a remarkable feeling, because when it's minus 17 degrees, I mean, no one's in town. So it's, except the locals. So it's really great.
Well, in the next couple of weeks, you might actually get that minus 17 degrees all over again, because, man, it's just been cold. I'm in Pennsylvania, and, it's just, with the wind, is crazy here. So,
yeah.
But Erik, one last question, and then we're gonna wrap things up. I'm gonna see if I can try to pull this out of you if you're willing to. You said you're gonna be researching for your next book. Dwight Evans is coming out this summer, so we get a preview of what the next book's gonna be about.
Well, it's not official. I don't have a book deal yet, so I'm in the process of doing my research, putting together a book proposal. So I can't really say it's going to be one of two topics. But I will say this. It'll be my first Yankee related book.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, we're definitely going to end this interview now. So no, I'm just kidding. just kidding, Erik. So no, Erik, we really appreciate, you stopping by and, fighting through this with us.
No.
Right now, the floor is yours. Plug whatever you want, where people can find you at, and, the whole 9 yards.
That would be great. So first of all, for your listeners, Two Sides of Glory, the 1986 Boston Red Sox in their own words. You can get that at your local bookstore. You can get it on Amazon. And I'll say this about it. A week doesn't go by when I don't get a note through my website from a Red Sox fan, and a Red Sox fan that was around back in '86, that doesn't say to me, "You've completely changed my outlook towards that '86 team," because I humanized them. And I hear that again and again and again, how I humanized them. And my book helped get them over the painful defeat in that '86 series. So that's my pitch on that. Look out for the Dwight Evans book, which will be coming out this summer. The working title on that is Behind the Gold Glove. And they can find me at my website, erikshermanbaseball.com. You can find me on Twitter at by Erik Sherman. So that's at BY Erik with a K Sherman. And I'm on Facebook and I'm on YouTube, Erik Sherman Baseball. So, but I'm most active on Twitter and Facebook. So if you want to communicate with me, talk to me about what you think of my books, I'd be more than happy to.
George?
Excellent. No, Erik, again, I want to thank you for coming on again. I mean, this was fun. It was fun for me because I lived through it, or lived with it for a while, I guess, and then through it afterwards. It's great to, to talk to somebody who's actually had the opportunity to speak to the players that went through it as well. And I think that as time goes on, as you said, the humanization factor of it, takes some of the sting away. And again, the appreciation of what you witnessed, a moment in time is very, very important. So
I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate coming on, and maybe we can do this again after the Dwight Evans book comes out.
Absolutely.
Hey, I would love to bring you back on, and maybe you could work some magic for us too. Sit there and.
I know where you're going. Yeah, I will certainly try. I will certainly try. And I'll certainly throw it out there.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Erik. As always, you can follow us over on our YouTube page. It's at BASEN617. All of our podcasts are there. You can also sit there and find us on Spotify, on iTunes, anywhere where you download your podcasts. But for George, for Erik, and for myself, thanks for stopping by the Pesky Podcast.